Hi guys, just want to do a quick budget build guide for Viessa. So you can probably tell from the footage, but pretty much you're going to be spamming your abilities as much as possible. Viessa is that sort of mage style character, that caster style character. So I wanted to sort of keep with a theme and make a build that sort of relies on spamming your abilities out as much as possible. And it will just also ends up being a really fun build, sort of doing it that way. So the build's going to be a ton of cooldown, some survivability, and it is going to work around that cold-bloodedness mod to give you even more cooldown reduction. So in terms of the build, I'm going to show you one for Ultimate Viessa first, but I will also show you a slightly cheaper version on Standard Viessa, just in case you don't quite have Ultimate Viessa yet. So you will notice I have put a Activator and one Catalyst on. Now in terms of the Catalyst, you don't need it. I will explain sort of how you can get away without a catalyst, but I like to just put a catalyst on my sub module, especially for Ultimate Descendants when I'm going to get the most use out of them. So that's up to you really if you want to put the catalyst on or not. In terms of the activator, I still think that is a budget sort of build even with an activator, especially for an ultimate character, because again all you need is that one single reactor for a character and you get 20 mod slots. It's massively worth it. I'd sort of say prioritize your activator first and foremost before your catalyst, because you sort of get the most bang for your buck that way. So in terms of the sub module, it really doesn't matter. Use whatever sub module you already have built up. Personally, I go for mid-air maneuvering. I just like sort of the flexibility of it, but go for whatever. Just make sure you have got a max upgraded sub-module to get the most module capacity. So as mentioned, this build does sort of work around the cold-bloodedness mod. It really fits in with the style of, you know, massive cooldown. It gives you more skill power and sort of gives you less skill cost, so you're just able to continuously spam abilities. And for only 5 module slots, you can't really go wrong with it. So I'd 100% advise upgrading your cold-bloodedness to max if you're able to. So in terms of survivability, there's sort of 3 mods really. So you've got your increased HP just as standard. This should be on basically all builds. You've got your spear and shields, so this just is going to give you a little bit more defensiveness, but also a little bit more skill power. And then you've got your time disruption. Time disruption is kind of perfect with this build because it gives you a nice amount of skill cooldown, but also a little bit more HP for only 10 mod slots. And so it gives you that extra survivability and the extra cooldown. You just really can't go wrong with this mod. You got your number fingers, again, just a nice amount of skill cooldown. Skill expansion, this just works out with all your abilities. Extra range means you can hit more enemies at a time with each ability cast. You've got MP collector, again, because you're spamming abilities so much, you need a lot of MP, even with the reduced cost from cold-bloodedness, and so MP collector just fits in nicely with this. So in terms of the module slots that you get given on Ultimate Viessa, just the standard, it's these ones here. So in terms of the C and the J, that I'll sort of call it, of course, you know, increase HP, skill expansion. With these 2 module slots, they're a bit of a pain. Normally for this symbol, you'd be wanting to lean into crit, but in my opinion, if you're doing sort of a budget build, you're not really able to lean in massively for crit, and just doing 2 crit mods, you're not going to get much value out of it. So I'll show you here, but as standard, Viessa's crit rate is fairly low and crit damage is fairly low. Putting 2 crit mods isn't really going to make much difference. If you want to do crit, you want to go all in on it and put a lot more catalysts. And since this is a budget build, I decided to instead focus on skill power. So the mods that I've done are Tech Master. This just gives you all-round skill power, which is fantastic for Viessa because she has already quite high skill power scalings, even on a passive which is 250%. But you know, her 4th ability is 1400, 3rd ability 1100, and so on. And so you really want to focus on skill power more than skill power modifier. But this just so happens to have tech skill power modifier as well as a skill power, so it's quite a solid mod. And tech obviously leaning into your passive and your 4th ability. And then the last mod, focus on tech, again because you don't really want to heavily focus on skill power modifier since Viessa's base power is so high. But for such a cheap mod, being only 3 mod slots because of the socket, you can't really go wrong because you get an extra 6.1% skill cooldown. Now as mentioned, if you don't want to put any catalyst onto the sub module, all you need to do is reduce the level of one of your mods by 1. So in this case, I'd probably just suggest reducing your spear and shield by 1 level, and then that'll put you down to the 80 module capacity, and this sub module catalyst won't be needed. So in terms of the standard Viessa build, it's slightly different, more so because of these module sockets that you get given as standard Viessa. So Viessa comes with a C and a J, but not the 2 Vs, and so you'll still stick with your skill expansion, increased HP, MP collector, time disruption, nimble fingers, and then of course sub module and cold-bloodedness. But the one change that I make is instead I go for focus on chill, because I'm not trying to make the most of those 2 extra sockets that I have for Ultimate Viessa. I'll instead move over to chill skill power, which will boost up all your abilities and you still get that skill cooldown. So that's the only real change to this. And as you can see, this build doesn't need an activator or catalyst. So in terms of the reactor, you actually have quite a few options. You want to be doing a core skill, but then you can either go into fusion or tech, and really the main stat that you want is skill cooldown. And so if you're able to get a chill fusion or a chill tech with skill cooldown, just go with that, and of course, you know, whatever weapon you like. With it being a budget build, I'm not going to suggest a perfect weapon for it. Just go with whatever gun you have already, and try and get a reactor for that gun. In terms of the secondary stats, skill duration's okay because it does help with your fourth ability. Chill skill would be fine. Of course, if you've gone for a fusion reactor, then you could go for fusion. But that skill cooldown is definitely the primary stat that you're going to want to go for your reactor. In terms of your external components, personally I just stick with my sort of standard external components that make me a little bit tankier. Reason being is with a budget build, you're sort of having to give up a little bit of tankiness in your mods, and so this makes up for it. You could look to use sort of one of the sets that gives you chill skill power, so Glacial, this gives you chill skill power modifier, but for me, power modifier isn't really worth it on this build, especially when you're sort of reducing some tankiness by swapping it out to this external component set. And the other option is the Polar Knight set, which gives you chill skill power rather than chill skill power modifier, which is pretty good, but again, you're just reducing your tankiness slightly by going for this, and so up to you if you want to try this, give it a go, but I personally just prefer the slightly tankier set. So yeah, I hope that helps. Of course, as you sort of play the game, you can decide whether or not you want to build up Viessa further. This just gives you sort of that opportunity to sort of play around with what is a solid build and decide what sort of play style you like to use, and then you can sort of add on to the build as you want. So yeah, thanks.